First class isn't for people like you. This ticket must be stolen." The words sliced through the bustling noise of JFK International Airport's Terminal 4 sharp and dismissive. 12-year-old Jasmine Reynolds froze, her gold-edged boarding pass clutched tightly in her hand. The plush red carpet of the priority boarding lane suddenly felt foreign beneath her worn sneakers as the flight attendant's accusation hung in the air. Around her, business people paused their urgent phone calls, and families stilled their excited children, all eyes turning to witness the confrontation. But Jasmine wasn't one to shrink away. Her father had prepared her for moments like this. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and met the flight attendant's gaze directly. "My ticket is valid," she stated, her voice clear and steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I'm in seat 2A. First class. I don't need to step aside while you figure that out." Victoria Hayes, the Global Airways flight attendant who had questioned her, couldn't hide her surprise at the young girl's composure. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and immaculate navy uniform seemed designed to radiate authority, but Jasmine's unexpected confidence momentarily threw her off balance. She glanced from the boarding pass to Jasmine's face, then down to her simple jeans hoodie and scuffed sneakers with undisguised disdain. "Let me see that again," Victoria demanded, snatching the boarding pass from Jasmine's hand. She studied it with exaggerated care, while other first-class passengers lined up behind the young girl, shifting impatiently. An elderly white couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That's not right," the woman whispered to her husband, nodding toward Jasmine. "That child has done nothing wrong." Meanwhile, a businessman in an expensive suit pretended to be absorbed in his phone, deliberately looking away from the uncomfortable scene unfolding before him. The morning sunlight streamed through the terminal's soaring windows, casting Victoria's skepticism in harsh relief. For Jasmine, this was supposed to be an adventure. Her first time flying alone, a milestone her father had carefully prepared her for. Now it was becoming something else entirely, a moment that would ripple outward with consequences no one in that boarding line could possibly anticipate. Nathan Reynolds hadn't always been the owner of Global Airways. 20 years earlier, he'd been a determined young entrepreneur with a vision and relentless work ethic, building his fortune through a series of smart technology investments before turning his attention to the aviation industry. At just 25, Nathan had experienced firsthand the sting of prejudice despite his early success. Dressed casually after closing a major deal, he'd entered an upscale watch boutique in Manhattan, intent on buying himself a well-earned reward. The sales associate had taken one look at his jeans and sneakers, his dark skin, and immediately assumed he couldn't afford anything in the store. "These pieces start at $20,000, the associate had said with a thin smile. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the department store down the street." Nathan had simply pulled out his platinum card, placed it on the counter, and said quietly, "I'll take the Patek Philippe in the window, and I'll remember how this felt." That day, he made a silent vow if he ever built a company of his own, no one would ever be judged by their appearance rather than their merit. It was a promise he had kept when he acquired the struggling regional carrier 5 years ago, transforming it into a respected international airline through careful management and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Despite his wealth and influence, Nathan remained intensely private. His name rarely appeared in business magazines or social media. He preferred substance over spectacle, results over recognition. This philosophy extended to how he was raising his daughter Jasmine. Jasmine had inherited her father's sharp intelligence, quiet confidence, and observant nature. At 12, she already displayed remarkable poise, the result of Nathan's careful guidance. He had always been honest with her about the world she would navigate. A world that might not always see her brilliance first, that might make assumptions based on her skin color rather than her character. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far," he'd told her once, his voice gentle but firm as they sat in his study after she'd faced subtle exclusion at a school event. "It's not fair, but it's reality. And when people underestimate you, let them. Their surprise when you exceed their expectations will be their first lesson." This morning had been significant for both of them. Nathan had personally escorted Jasmine to the security checkpoint, a rare public appearance that went unnoticed in the pre-boarding rush. Alexandra, his mother, and Jasmine's grandmother, was expecting her granddaughter for a 2-week visit in Boston. "Call me when you land," Nathan had said, hugging Jasmine tightly. His usual stoic demeanor had softened with fatherly affection. "I will, Dad." Jasmine had promised excitement evident in her voice. "Remember, first class isn't just about the wider seats," he'd said, adjusting the strap of her backpack. "It's about dignity. Everyone deserves it regardless of where they're sitting, and never let anyone make you feel you don't belong." Jasmine had nodded, absorbing the lesson as she always did, thoughtfully, completely. Now, as she stood in the priority boarding lane, those words echoed in her mind. Her father had prepared her for moments like this, though neither had expected it to come quite so soon. Victoria Hayes had been with Global Airways for 15 years, long before Nathan Reynolds had acquired the company. She had worked her way up from domestic routes to international first class, where she prided herself on recognizing the right kind of premium passengers, the business executives, celebrities, and wealthy travelers who, in her mind, truly belonged in the front of the plane. Now looking at Jasmine Reynolds, Victoria saw none of those markers. Just a young black girl in casual clothes who surely must be confused about her seating assignment. "There's obviously a mistake with your ticket," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension as she reluctantly handed the boarding pass back to Jasmine. "First class is for our priority travelers. You need to step aside so I can help these actual first-class passengers board." Her tone left no doubt about what her words carefully avoided saying. Explicitly that a young black girl traveling alone in first class was an anomaly, something that simply couldn't be right. "I don't need to step aside," Jasmine countered, standing her ground despite the growing knot in her stomach. "My ticket is for seat 2A first class. I've flown first class before. I know where I belong." Victoria's expression hardened, her professional veneer cracking slightly at the child's continued resistance. "Listen, little girl," she hissed, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent nearby passengers from hearing. "I don't know how you got this ticket, but first-class seats cost thousands of dollars. Either you've made a mistake or this ticket isn't yours. Now move aside before I call security." Several passengers gasped audibly at the threat. The elderly woman who had whispered to her husband earlier took a half-step forward as if considering intervention. A middle-aged black businessman further back in line frowned deeply, recognition of a familiar scenario flashing across his face. "My father bought this ticket for me," Jasmine said, her voice remarkably steady despite the public humiliation. "Call whoever you need to call. I'm not moving until you verify my seat." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Fine," she snapped, gesturing sharply to a younger flight attendant nearby. "Watch the boarding door. I need to deal with this situation." She gripped Jasmine's elbow, attempting to steer her away from the boarding line. "Come with me. We'll sort this out at the gate desk." "Don't touch me," Jasmine said firmly, pulling her arm away. "I'll walk myself, thank you." The dignity in the 12-year-old's response seemed to further irritate Victoria, whose cheeks flushed with anger. Around them, the atmosphere had grown tense, with several passengers now openly watching the confrontation unfold. "First class isn't for people like you," Victoria muttered, just loudly enough for Jasmine and those nearest to hear. "You're holding up legitimate passengers." As Jasmine stood her ground at the boarding gate, a wave of humiliation threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Several passengers were now staring, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed judgment. One businessman in an expensive suit glanced at his watch pointedly. The elderly woman who had been watching finally stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said to Victoria, her voice gentle but firm. "I couldn't help but notice—" "Please wait your turn, ma'am." Victoria cut her off. "I'm handling a situation here." Jasmine stood tall despite the growing discomfort, her father's teachings echoing in her mind. The problem isn't yours, Jasmine. It's theirs. Their assumptions reveal their limitations, not yours. She considered calling her father, but hesitated. He had trusted her to handle this trip independently. She didn't want to disappoint him by calling for help at the first sign of trouble. But as Victoria began to radio the gate agent describing a possible ticket fraud situation, Jasmine realized this was escalating beyond what she should handle alone. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Hayes?" The voice cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. Jasmine turned to see a distinguished older man with silver hair and a tailored suit standing a few feet away. His name tag identified him as Michael Ramirez, Senior Vice President of Global Airways. His dark eyes moved from Victoria to Jasmine, and a flash of recognition crossed his face. Victoria's demeanor shifted instantly. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by a professional, albeit slightly flustered expression. "Oh, Mr. Ramirez, good morning." Her voice pitched higher, nervous energy evident in her sudden smile. "No problem at all. This young lady just seems to be confused about her seating assignment. I was about to call the gate agent to sort it out." Michael's eyes narrowed, the only indication that he didn't quite believe Victoria's explanation. "And why would you need to do that? Doesn't she have a boarding pass?" Victoria stammered slightly. "Well, yes, but it's unusual a child traveling alone in first class. I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" Michael's tone sharpened, cutting through her excuses. "Is Global Airways now refusing service to valid ticket holders, Ms. Hayes? Or is there another reason this young passenger is being detained?" The question hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. Victoria's face flushed a deep red as she struggled to respond. Michael turned his attention to Jasmine, his expression softening. "May I see your boarding pass, young lady?" Jasmine handed it over, relief washing through her at finally finding an ally. Michael glanced at the boarding pass, then looked directly at Victoria, his professional demeanor now underscored with unmistakable disapproval. "Ms. Hayes, I see that Ms. Reynolds has a valid first-class boarding pass for seat 2A. There is absolutely nothing unusual about her ticket. What's unusual is your response to it." His voice had dropped lower but carried to the hushed passengers nearby. "Global Airways does not discriminate based on age, appearance, or any other factor. A valid ticket is a valid ticket. You will escort Ms. Reynolds to her seat immediately." Victoria looked as if she'd been slapped. "Of course, Mr. Ramirez." She managed her voice barely above a whisper. "Right away." As Victoria led Jasmine down the aisle toward first class, Michael discreetly reached for his phone and sent a text message. The brief exchange would set in motion events that would transform not just one airline, but potentially an entire industry. The soft leather of seat 2A embraced Jasmine as she settled in, trying to reclaim the excitement she'd felt earlier that morning. The spacious first-class cabin was quieter than the economy section she'd passed through, the atmosphere one of hushed privilege and comfort. A different flight attendant, Sarah Wilson, approached with a warm smile. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff, Ms. Reynolds? Perhaps some apple juice or water?" "Water, please," Jasmine replied, grateful for the normal interaction. Sarah returned promptly with a crystal glass of ice water served on a small silver tray. "First time flying alone?" she asked conversationally, noticing Jasmine's youth. "Yes," Jasmine admitted. "I'm going to visit my grandmother in Boston." "Well, you're in good hands with us," Sarah assured her. "If you need anything at all during the flight, just press this call button." She demonstrated the button on the armrest before moving on to the next passenger. Several rows behind Jasmine, Michael Ramirez had taken his seat. His presence a quiet guarantee that the rest of Jasmine's journey would proceed without incident. Occasionally he glanced up from his tablet to ensure all was well. Victoria Hayes remained in the first-class cabin performing her duties with professional efficiency, but she noticeably avoided direct interaction with Jasmine. When she passed by Jasmine's row, her smile was tight, her eyes never quite meeting the young girl's. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jasmine gazed out the window at the blanket of clouds below her, thoughts drifting to an incident from the previous school year. She had been the only black student invited to a prestigious science competition, and upon arrival a coordinator had directed her to the volunteer check-in area, assuming she couldn't possibly be a participant. Her science teacher had intervened then, much as Michael had today. Her father's words after that incident echoed in her mind. "The problem isn't yours, Jasmine. It's theirs. Their assumptions reveal their limitations, not yours." She wondered what her father would say about today's incident. Would he be angry? Disappointed? Would he make a complaint? She didn't want anyone to get in trouble because of her. But something about the interaction had felt deeply wrong. The in-flight entertainment system offered dozens of movies and TV shows, but Jasmine found herself unable to focus on any of them. Instead, she opened her book, a biography of Katherine Johnson, the NASA mathematician, and lost herself in the story of another black woman who had excelled in spaces where people had questioned her belonging. At 37,000 feet above the eastern seaboard, Michael Ramirez typed a concise message on his secure phone. "Nathan urgent. Victoria Hayes denied Jasmine boarding in first class, suggested her ticket was fraudulent, attempted to force her to economy, publicly humiliated her in front of other passengers, called it protocol but clear discrimination. I intervened. She's now safely in 2A. We'll call with full details after landing." In his private office overlooking the sprawling runways of Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, Nathan Reynolds was in the midst of a high-stakes conference call when the message appeared on his screen. His expression remained neutral, years of business negotiations having perfected his poker face, but his hand gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. "Gentlemen, something urgent has come up," Nathan said, his voice betraying none of the fury building inside him. "Let's reconvene at 3 p.m. He ended the call without waiting for responses and immediately called his executive assistant, Sophia Alvarez, who had been with him since before he acquired Global Airways. "Sophia," Nathan said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of steel. "I need you to pull the personnel file for a flight attendant named Victoria Hayes. She's working on Flight 417 to Boston today. I want everything: employment history, performance reviews, any incident reports or complaints, and I need it within 30 minutes. Sophia, recognizing the controlled tension in her boss's voice, didn't ask questions. "I'll have it for you immediately," she promised, already pulling up the airline's secure employee database. Nathan then sent a brief reply to Michael, "Details, now." Michael's response came quickly, a precise account of the incident. Victoria's open skepticism, her accusation that the ticket must be stolen, her attempts to physically remove Jasmine from the line, her muttered comment about "people like you," and the stark contrast between her treatment of Jasmine and other first-class travelers. Nathan read the message twice, each word, stoking the cold fury building inside him. He had prepared Jasmine for a world that might not always see her worth immediately, but he hadn't expected her to face such blatant prejudice on his own airline flying first class on a ticket he had purchased. As he waited for Sophia's report, Nathan paced his office, the panoramic view of planes taking off and landing now just a blur beyond the glass. He had built Global Airways on principles of excellence, integrity, and respect for all passengers. What had happened to Jasmine was a direct violation of those principles. Within 25 minutes, Sophia knocked on his door, a comprehensive file in hand. "Victoria Hayes," Sophia began as she entered. 15 years with the airline, the last 8 in first-class international. Generally positive performance reviews, though there are some concerning notes. She flipped to a highlighted section. Her supervisor noted 3 years ago that Hayes occasionally makes assumptions about passengers that affect service quality. It was flagged for follow-up but apparently never addressed. "Any complaints?" Nathan asked, taking the file. 5 in the last 2 years. Sophia replied, pointing to another section. "All resolved internally, all from passengers who felt they were treated dismissively or with suspicion. The pattern is striking. 4 of the 5 were minorities, 1 was an elderly passenger in casual clothing. None were escalated beyond initial customer service. Nathan flipped through the file, absorbing the information quickly. The pattern wasn't subtle at all. It was glaring, a clear record of biased behavior that should have triggered intervention long ago. "Book me on the next flight to Boston," Nathan said, his decision made. "And contact Boston Logan Airport Management. I want to be there when Flight 4117 arrives." "Already done," Sophia said, sliding a boarding pass across the desk. "Your jet is being prepared. You'll land 30 minutes before Jasmine's flight." Nathan nodded, grateful as always for Sophia's efficiency. "And Michael?" "I've texted him that you'll meet the flight. He'll ensure Jasmine doesn't leave the gate area until you arrive." Nathan stood gathering his suit jacket. The cold fury inside him had crystallized into purpose. This wasn't just about Jasmine anymore. It was about every passenger who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong, every subtle slight that had gone unaddressed, every assumption made based on appearance rather than merit. "One more thing," Nathan said, pausing at the door. "Schedule an emergency leadership meeting for tomorrow morning. All department heads in person, no exceptions. And contact Kevin Blackwell in legal. I want him on standby for this afternoon." Sophia nodded, understanding the significance. "This won't happen again," she said quietly. "No." Nathan agreed, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "It won't. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final descent into Boston Logan International Airport. Local time is 11:42 a.m. and the current temperature is 72 degrees. We'll be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." The captain's announcement roused Jasmine from her book. She marked her page and gazed out the window as the aircraft descended through a layer of wispy clouds, revealing the sprawling cityscape of Boston below. The harbor glinted in the late morning sunlight, sailboats creating white dots against the blue water. Several rows behind her, Michael Ramirez discreetly checked his phone one last time before the landing. A message from Nathan confirmed he was waiting at the gate. Michael sent a quick reply. "Landing now. We'll ensure Jay stays on board until all passengers deplane. V has no idea." The aircraft touched down smoothly, and as it taxied toward the terminal, the familiar sounds filled the cabin. Seatbelts unbuckling overhead bins, opening the murmur of conversation, rising as passengers prepared to deplane. "Please remain seated until we reach the gate," and the captain turns off the fastened seatbelt sign. Victoria Hayes announced, her professional smile back in place as she moved through the cabin. When the aircraft finally came to a stop at the gate, Jasmine gathered her backpack but remained seated as the other first-class passengers began to stand and collect their belongings. Victoria was assisting an elderly gentleman with his carry-on, her back to Jasmine. Michael approached Jasmine's seat, leaning down slightly. "Your grandmother asked if you could wait until the other passengers have deplaned," he said quietly, the small lie necessary for the moment. "There's someone meeting you at the gate." Jasmine nodded, assuming her grandmother had arranged some kind of assistance. She remained in her seat, watching as the first-class cabin gradually emptied. Victoria Hayes was at the door, bidding farewell to each passenger with practiced cordiality. "Thank you for flying with Global Airways, Mr. Davidson. Hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful stay in Boston, Dr. Miller. Goodbye, Ms. Patel. Safe travels." Finally, only Jasmine remained in the first-class cabin. Michael nodded to her, indicating it was time to go. She stood, adjusted her backpack, and walked down the aisle toward the exit, Michael following a few steps behind. As Jasmine approached the door, Victoria's smile faltered slightly before she recovered. "Thank you for flying with us today," she said, her tone professional but cooler than it had been with the adult passengers. Jasmine simply nodded and continued into the jet bridge. Michael followed, exchanging a knowing glance with Victoria that made the flight attendant's brow furrow in confusion. As the crew began to disembark behind the last passengers, Victoria Hayes stepped into the jet bridge, already mentally reviewing her plans for her 24-hour layover in Boston. She was several steps into the jet bridge when a voice stopped her. "Ms. Hayes." Victoria Hayes turned toward the voice, her professional smile automatically in place. Standing at the entrance to the terminal was a tall, impeccably dressed black man in his mid-40s. His tailored suit spoke of wealth and influence, but it was the quiet authority in his stance that commanded attention. Beside him, to Victoria's surprise, stood Jasmine, the girl from 2A. "Yes," Victoria replied, puzzled by being addressed by name by someone she didn't recognize. "I'm Nathan Reynolds," the man said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable weight. "I believe you questioned my daughter's right to be in first class, suggested her ticket was stolen, and attempted to remove her from the boarding line." The color drained from Victoria's face so rapidly that for a moment Nathan thought she might faint. Around them, crew members froze, some with hands over their mouths, as the realization of what was happening spread like electricity through the jet bridge. A flight attendant whispered urgently to the captain, who turned to observe the unfolding scene. Nathan Reynolds, the owner of Global Airways. "Mr. Reynolds," she stammered, her composure evaporating. There must be some misunderstanding." Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. My understanding is that you questioned my daughter's valid first-class ticket, suggested it must be stolen, and tried to physically remove her from the boarding line while legitimate passengers boarded. You said, and I quote, 'First class isn't for people like you.'" His words were precise, each one landing like a physical blow. Victoria's eyes darted frantically around the jet bridge, looking for support or escape, finding neither. "Sir, I was just following protocols for unusual situations. When we see—" "What was unusual, Ms. Hayes?" Nathan interrupted, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire space. "The fact that my daughter is black, or that she wasn't wearing designer clothing because her boarding pass was valid. Her reservation was confirmed. The only unusual aspect of the situation was your response to it." By now, several crew members had stopped in the jet bridge, watching the exchange with widening eyes. Among them was Sarah Wilson, who had served Jasmine during the flight. The captain, a veteran pilot named Robert Jackson, stepped forward, quickly assessing the situation. Victoria's professional training deserted her completely. "This is discrimination against me," she snapped, her professional mask finally cracking. "I was following procedures. You're abusing your power because your daughter had her feelings hurt." A collective gasp rose from the watching crew members. The captain's face darkened at Victoria's outburst. "Procedures?" Nathan's voice dropped even lower, somehow more dangerous in its quietness. "Show me the procedure that instructs flight attendants to accuse passengers of stealing tickets based on their appearance. Show me where Global Airways protocol directs staff to publicly humiliate children traveling alone." Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it again, no defense forthcoming. "You made assumptions about my daughter based solely on her appearance," Nathan continued, unwavering. "Tell me, Ms. Hayes, what exactly about Maya made you decide she didn't belong in first class?" The direct question hung in the air, unanswerable, without admitting the prejudice that had driven her actions. Victoria's shoulders sagged in defeat. "I sincerely apologize if I caused any offense," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was never my intention to—" "Your intentions are irrelevant." Nathan cut in, the steel in his voice more evident now. "Your actions spoke clearly enough. You violated the core principles of the airline I own." Jasmine stood quietly beside her father, watching the exchange. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction at seeing Victoria's discomfort, only a thoughtful observation of how her father handled the situation with dignity and clarity. "Dad?" she said softly, touching his arm. "It's okay. I'm fine." Nathan placed his hand over his daughter's, briefly acknowledging her grace, but his focus remained on Victoria. "It's not okay," he replied, loud enough for everyone in the jet bridge to hear. "And it won't be okay until every person who boards a Global Airways flight can expect to be treated with the same respect, regardless of what they look like." He turned back to Victoria, who seemed to have shrunk several inches under his steady gaze. Ms. Hayes, your employment with Global Airways is terminated effective immediately. The pronouncement fell like a hammer in the quiet jet bridge. You can't just fire me like that, Victoria protested, voice rising in panic. There are procedures, union protocols. I'm not just firing you, Nathan replied, his tone unchanged. I'm upholding the standards of my company. Your actions violated our anti-discrimination policies, which are grounds for immediate termination without progressive discipline. You'll surrender your credentials to ground staff before leaving the airport. Your final pay and benefits will be processed according to company policy. The finality in his tone left no room for argument or appeal. Captain Jackson stepped forward, his expression grim but determined. Mr. Reynolds, he said with a respectful nod. I'll ensure Ms. Hayes is escorted to HR for processing. Nathan acknowledged the captain with a nod of his own, then turned his attention to his daughter. Ready to see Grandma? He asked, his voice softening. Jasmine nodded, casting one last glance at Victoria Hayes, who stood frozen in disbelief, her career ended in a brief conversation in a jet bridge. As Nathan and Jasmine walked away, the hushed conversations among the remaining crew members began. Word would spread quickly throughout the Boston crew base, then to other hubs, and soon throughout the entire airline. The owner of Global Airways had fired a flight attendant on the spot for discriminating against his daughter, but more importantly for violating the company's principles of equal respect for all passengers. Victoria Hayes stood motionless in the jet bridge, the reality of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. 15 years of service ended in less than 5 minutes. The captain's hand on her shoulder finally broke her trance. Ms. Hayes, Captain Jackson said quietly, we need to proceed to HR. Victoria turned to him, her eyes wide with shock. He can't do this to me, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. I've given 15 years to this company. This is just one incident too many, the captain replied firmly. And from what Mr. Ramirez has shared, it's part of a pattern, not an isolated case. Michael Ramirez stepped forward, his expression solemn. Victoria, I observed the entire interaction at boarding. You singled out that young girl based solely on her appearance. You questioned a valid ticket, suggested it was stolen, and attempted to physically remove her from the line. That violates everything Global Airways stands for. Victoria's shock gave way to defensive rage. Oh, so now we're supposed to let anyone into first class without question. What if she had been trying to upgrade herself? What if... Stop, Michael interrupted. You didn't verify anything. You assumed. You didn't check the manifest. You didn't call the gate agent. You took one look at a young black girl in casual clothes and decided she couldn't possibly belong in first class. That's not security protocol. That's prejudice. Sarah Wilson, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. I served her during the flight, she said quietly. She was polite, respectful, and clearly familiar with first-class service. There was nothing about her behavior that warranted suspicion. Victoria looked from face to face, finding no sympathy among her colleagues. The reality of her situation began to dawn on her. This wasn't a misunderstanding that would be smoothed over. This was the end of her career with Global Airways. Captain Jackson gestured toward the terminal. We need to proceed to HR. Now. As they walked through the terminal, Victoria became acutely aware of how quickly her world had changed. Just hours ago, she had been a respected senior flight attendant. Now she was being escorted through the airport like someone who had committed a serious infraction, which she was beginning to realize she had. In a small office in the Crew Operations Center, a Global Airways human resources representative was already waiting a termination form prepared on the desk. Victoria's hands trembled as she surrendered her company ID crew badge and airport security credentials. Your personal belongings from your crew bag will be forwarded to your home address. The HR representative explained, her tone professional but cool. Your return travel privileges will remain active until midnight tonight should you wish to return home immediately. Victoria nodded numbly. signing the forms placed in front of her. As the reality of her situation sank in, her defiance crumbled, replaced by dawning horror. "I've been with this airline for 15 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Doesn't that count for anything?" The HR representative looked at her directly. "Ms. Hayes' length of service doesn't excuse discriminatory behavior. Mr. Reynolds has been very clear about this since he acquired the airline. The passenger experience guidelines specifically state that all passengers must be treated with equal respect, regardless of age, race, gender, appearance, or any other characteristic." Victoria had no response. She had read those guidelines, had even nodded along during training sessions, but somewhere along the way, she had begun operating on a different set of unwritten rules. Assumptions about who belonged in first class, who deserved her best service, who was worth her full professional attention. As she gathered her personal items and prepared to leave, Captain Jackson stopped her briefly at the door. "Victoria," he said quietly, "this isn't just about today. Michael shared with me that there have been other complaints. This was a pattern, not an isolated incident." She looked up at him, surprise mingling with dawning recognition on her face. Perhaps deep down she had known this about herself, but had never been forced to confront it. "I never meant to," she began. "Intent doesn't erase impact," the captain said gently. "Take this as an opportunity for reflection." Victoria nodded once, then walked out of the office, out of the secure area, and into the public terminal. No longer an employee of Global Airways, no longer protected by the authority of her uniform, just a woman facing the consequences of her actions and the uncomfortable truths they had revealed. As Victoria Hayes exited the secure area of Boston Logan Airport, Nathan Reynolds and Jasmine were already in a private car heading toward Alexandra Reynolds's Beacon Hill home. The sleek black SUV moved smoothly through midday traffic, father and daughter sitting side by side in contemplative silence. Finally, Jasmine spoke. "You didn't have to come all the way to Boston, Dad." Nathan turned to his daughter, studying her face. Despite her composure, he could see the lingering hurt in her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders. "Yes, I did," he replied simply. "Because of who you are?" Jasmine asked. "Because you own the airline." Nathan shook his head. "Because of who you are. My daughter, who deserves to be treated with the same respect as any other passenger." Jasmine absorbed this, then asked the question that had been troubling her since the jet bridge confrontation. "Did you fire her because of me? Because she was mean to me, specifically?" Nathan considered his answer carefully. "No, Jasmine. I fired her because what she did violates everything our company stands for. If she treated you that way, questioning your right to be in first class based on nothing but how you look, she's almost certainly done it to other passengers, and that's unacceptable whether the passenger is my daughter or a complete stranger." The car turned onto Beacon Hill's narrow, tree-lined streets, brick townhouses rising on either side. Nathan's phone buzzed with incoming messages, the news of Victoria Hayes' termination already rippling through the company. He ignored them for now, focusing on his daughter. "How did it make you feel?" he asked gently. "When she questioned your ticket?" Jasmine looked out the window, watching the historic neighborhood pass by. "Small," she admitted after a moment. "Like I was doing something wrong, even though I knew I wasn't. Like I didn't belong there, even though you taught me I belong anywhere my ticket takes me." Nathan nodded, a familiar ache in his chest. Despite his success, his wealth, his ownership of the very airline in question, he couldn't protect his daughter from these moments. The countless small cuts of prejudice that accumulated over a lifetime. "You handled it with grace," he told her. "More grace than many adults would have shown." Jasmine turned back to him, a small smile finally breaking through. "I remembered what you always say. Their assumptions are about them, not about me." "That's right," Nathan said, pride evident in his voice. "But remembering that doesn't make it hurt any less in the moment, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't address it when it happens. The car pulled up in front of Alexandra Reynolds' elegant townhouse. Before they got out, Nathan placed his hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "What happened today isn't going to be just about one flight attendant losing her job," he said. "It's going to be about making sure this doesn't happen to other passengers in the future. I promise you that." Jasmine nodded, understanding the determination in her father's voice. She had seen it before when he set his mind to changing things that needed to be changed. As they approached the front door, it swung open to reveal Alexandra Reynolds, elegant even at 70, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face lit up at the sight of her granddaughter, though surprise registered when she saw her son as well. "Nathan, I didn't expect you until next weekend," she said, embracing them both. "Change your plans, Mom." Nathan replied, his tone conveying that there was more to the story. "We've got some things to talk about." Inside the stately townhouse, as Jasmine unpacked in the guest room that was always kept ready for her visits, Nathan briefed his mother on the events of the morning. Alexandra listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "It's 2025, she said, finally shaking her head. "And still, some things haven't changed enough." "Some things haven't," Nathan agreed. "But some things can, and will." He checked his watch. "I need to make some calls. The leadership team needs to be prepared for tomorrow's meeting." As Nathan stepped into his mother's study to begin the calls that would reshape Global Airways, Alexandra went upstairs to check on Jasmine. She found her granddaughter arranging her books on the bedside table, the biography of Katherine Johnson prominently displayed. "Your father told me what happened," Alexandra said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Are you okay?" Jasmine sat beside her grandmother, leaning against her slightly. "I'm okay," she said. "Dad made sure of that." Alexandra put her arm around Jasmine's shoulders. "Your father is a good man, and when good men with power decide to use it to make things right, real change can happen." "He fired her," Jasmine said, still processing the swiftness of her father's action. Alexandra nodded. "Yes, he did. And knowing your father, that's just the beginning." Nathan Reynolds' private jet lifted smoothly into the evening sky, leaving Boston behind as it banked west toward New York. Seated in the main cabin, Nathan was deep in conversation with Sofia Alvarez, who had joined him for the return flight after handling logistics from headquarters. "The leadership team is confirmed for 8 a.m. tomorrow," Sofia reported, reviewing notes on her tablet. "All department heads plus the VP of Human Resources, Chief Operating Officer, and Lead Counsel." "Good," Nathan nodded. "And Michael?" "Arriving tonight on the last commercial flight. He's prepared a full account of the incident and has already submitted it to HR for the record." Nathan leaned back in his seat, his mind cycling through the necessary steps ahead. The termination of Victoria Hayes was just the beginning, a response to a symptom, not a cure for the underlying condition. "I want a complete review of our customer service training protocols," he said. "Not just the official materials, but the unwritten culture. How are new flight attendants actually being trained? What informal messages are they getting about who belongs in first class?" Sofia made notes as he spoke. "Thomas Collins will want specific parameters for the review," she said, referring to the Chief Operating Officer. "Tell him I want depth, not speed," Nathan replied. "This isn't about checking boxes. I want to understand how we got to a place where a senior flight attendant felt comfortable discriminating against a passenger based on appearance." The jet reached cruising altitude, the gentle hum of the engines providing a backdrop to their planning session. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. "Jasmine is doing fine, handling this with remarkable maturity. You should be proud." A brief smile crossed his face before he refocused on the task at hand. "What's the current status of our anti-discrimination training?" Sofia pulled up another document. "Annual online module required for all customer-facing employees. Completion rate is 97%, but it's clearly not effective, Nathan finished for her. Online modules don't change behavior or challenge deep-seated assumptions. No? Sophia agreed. They satisfy regulatory requirements but don't create meaningful change. Nathan stood moving to the small conference table where documents were spread out. We need something more comprehensive, something that requires actual engagement, not just clicking through slides. For the next hour, they outlined the framework for what would become the Phoenix Protocol, named for the mythical bird rising from ashes, symbolizing the transformation Nathan envisioned for his airline's culture. As the plane began its descent toward Teterboro, Nathan reviewed their work with satisfaction. "This is a good start," he said, "but tomorrow's meeting will be crucial. Some of the leadership team won't understand why one incident warrants such a comprehensive response." Sophia gathered the documents, a knowing expression on her face. "They will after you explain it to them." The jet touched down smoothly, taxiing toward the private aviation terminal. Through the window, Nathan could see his car waiting on the tarmac, ready to take him to headquarters, where he would prepare for the most important leadership meeting since he had acquired the airline. "One more thing," he said as they prepared to disembark. "I want a complete audit of customer complaints for the past 2 years. Look for patterns we might have missed, situations similar to what Jasmine experienced that might have been dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings." Sophia nodded. "I'll have a preliminary report by morning." As they walked down the steps to the tarmac, the cool evening air, a welcome change from the recycled atmosphere of the aircraft, Nathan's phone rang. It was Michael Ramirez. "Nathan," Michael said when he answered, "you should know. Victoria Hayes has retained an attorney. She's claiming wrongful termination and threatening to go public with her side of the story." Nathan's expression didn't change. "Let her. The truth will stand up to whatever narrative she tries to spin." "And the leadership team?" Michael asked. "Some of them might see this as an overreaction to a personal matter." "By tomorrow afternoon," Nathan replied, his voice calm but determined. "They'll understand that this isn't about one flight attendant or one incident. It's about who we are as a company and what we stand for." He ended the call and slid into the waiting car, his mind already mapping out the presentation that would convince his leadership team that the Phoenix Protocol wasn't just necessary, it was overdue. The executive boardroom at Global Airways headquarters fell silent as Nathan Reynolds concluded his opening remarks. Around the polished mahogany table sat the airline's most senior leaders, men and women responsible for various aspects of the company's operations, from finance to fleet management, from marketing to maintenance. "Yesterday," Nathan said, his gaze moving around the table, "a Global Airways flight attendant discriminated against a 12-year-old passenger based solely on her appearance. She accused the child of stealing a first-class ticket, attempted to physically remove her from the boarding line, and stated explicitly that first class isn't for people like you." He paused, letting the information sink in. "That child happened to be my daughter Jasmine. But make no mistake, this meeting isn't happening because the passenger was related to me. It's happening because no passenger should ever be treated that way on our airline." Thomas Collins, the chief operating officer, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Nathan, we all agree that Ms. Hayes' behavior was unacceptable. She's been terminated appropriately so. But is a complete overhaul of our training and service protocols really necessary based on one incident?" Nathan's eyes locked with Collins. "One incident, is that what you think this is?" He nodded to Sophia, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. "It wasn't one incident," he replied, his voice dangerously calm. "Sophia, please walk us through what you found." Sophia stood her tablet connected to the room's display screen. "At Mr. Reynolds' request, I conducted an analysis of customer complaints received over the past 2 years, specifically looking for patterns related to discriminatory treatment." Charts and graphs appeared on the screen, color-coded for clarity. "What we found was concerning. While overall complaint numbers remain within industry standards, There's a statistically significant pattern when we break down complaints by passenger demographics. She advanced to the next slide, showing a stark comparison. Passengers of color are 3.2 times more likely to report being questioned about their seating assignments, particularly in premium cabins. They're 2.8 times more likely to report receiving less attentive service, and they're 4.1 times more likely to report feeling unwelcome or out of place during their Global Airways experience. Linda Montgomery, the HR director, leaned forward, studying the data with a frown. "Why hasn't this pattern been flagged before?" "Because we weren't looking for it," Sophia replied. "Our complaint categorization system doesn't track these specific issues. These patterns only became visible when we reanalyzed the raw complaint data." She advanced to another slide showing complaint resolutions. More disturbing is how these complaints were handled. In 87% of cases, the passenger was offered a generic apology and minor compensation. Only 9% resulted in any form of investigation. Less than 2% led to corrective action for the employee involved. Daniel Williams, VP of Customer Experience, shook his head. "This is deeply troubling. My team reviews service metrics weekly, but we've been missing this entirely." Nathan reclaimed the floor. "This isn't about assigning blame. It's about acknowledging that we have a problem and taking decisive action to address it." He nodded to Michael Ramirez, who had been quietly observing from his seat near the end of the table. "Michael, you witnessed the incident with Jasmine. In your 30 years in this industry, how common is this type of experience?" Michael considered the question carefully. "More common than we'd like to admit. What happened to Jasmine wasn't an aberration. It was simply more visible because of who she is. For every passenger like Jasmine who has a connection to someone with influence, there are dozens who simply absorb these indignities in silence, perhaps never flying with us again." James Peterson, one of the more conservative board members, shifted uncomfortably. "I understand the concern, but aren't we risking an overreaction here? Victoria Hayes made a serious error in judgment, but a company-wide initiative seems excessive." Nathan's expression remained calm, but his voice carried unmistakable conviction. "James, if we had discovered that 25% of our aircraft were experiencing a mechanical issue that affected passenger safety, would addressing every aircraft be an overreaction?" "Of course not," Peterson replied. "Safety is core to our operations." "So is dignity," Nathan countered, leaning forward. "So is the fundamental right of every passenger to be treated with equal respect regardless of how they look. This isn't peripheral to our business. It's central to who we are as a company." He stood, commanding the room's full attention. "Let me be absolutely clear. What happened to Jasmine isn't just a customer service issue. It's a moral failure that undermines everything we claim to stand for. And the data shows it's not isolated. It's a pattern that we've failed to recognize and address." The room fell silent as the leadership team absorbed Nathan's words and the data before them. Kevin Blackwell, the airline's lead counsel, spoke up. "Beyond the ethical considerations, there are serious legal implications here. If these patterns were to become public through litigation, the company could face substantial liability." Nathan shook his head slightly. "That's true, Kevin. But our motivation isn't avoiding lawsuits. It's doing what's right. It's ensuring that what happened to Jasmine never happens to another passenger, whether they're the CEO's daughter or not." He stood, commanding the room's full attention. "I've asked Sophia to form a task force to develop what we're calling the Phoenix Protocol, a comprehensive approach to transforming our service culture. I expect your full cooperation and the resources of your departments to support this initiative." The message was clear. This wasn't optional, and it wasn't open for debate. As the meeting continued, with Sophia outlining the preliminary framework for the Phoenix Protocol, the initial skepticism of some team members gradually gave way to engagement and even enthusiasm. By the time the 3-hour session concluded, what had begun as one man's response to his daughter's humiliation had evolved into a company-wide commitment to meaningful change. 2 weeks after the emergency leadership meeting, Sophia Alvarez stood before a different audience in the company's main training facility. The room was filled with a cross-section of Global Airways employees, flight attendants, gate agents, customer service representatives, and managers from various departments. Behind her, a sleek digital display showcased the Phoenix Protocol logo, a stylized phoenix in Global Airways' corporate colors wings, outstretched as if embracing the company name beneath it. "Thank you all for being here," Sophia began. "Over the next 3 days, you'll be the first group to experience the Phoenix Protocol training program. Your feedback will be invaluable as we refine it before the company-wide rollout next month." She advanced to the first substantive slide. The Phoenix Protocol isn't just another corporate initiative. It represents a fundamental recommitment to our core values of dignity, respect, and excellence in service for every passenger. Daniel Williams joined her at the front of the room. "As VP of Customer Experience, I've been part of many training programs over the years. This one is different because it addresses not just what we do, but why and how we do it." Together, they outlined the key components of the protocol. First was the verification before assumption principle. When there's a question about a passenger's seating assignment or any other issue, Daniel explained, we verify facts first without making assumptions based on appearance. Every passenger deserves the benefit of the doubt. He clicked to a slide showing a flowchart. Here's the new procedure. If you have a question about a passenger's seating, you check the manifest first. If the manifest confirms their assignment, you welcome them to their seat. No exceptions, no unusual situation protocols that override this process. Next came the Equal Excellence Standard, a commitment to providing the same level of service to all passengers, regardless of their appearance, age, or other characteristics. This isn't about lowering standards for anyone, Sophia emphasized. It's about raising them for everyone. Third was the implementation of the 3 perspectives approach to decision-making. Before taking action that might negatively impact a passenger, Daniel explained, staff are trained to consider the situation from 3 perspectives: the passengers as neutral observers and through the lens of our company values. The 4th component was perhaps the most innovative, the accountability loop, a new system for reporting, tracking, and addressing incidents where passengers experienced discriminatory treatment. What makes this different from our current complaint process, Sophia explained, is that it doesn't wait for passengers to report problems. It empowers our own staff to flag concerning interactions they witness, creating a culture of internal accountability. Finally, they introduced the Mystery Passenger Program, a diverse group of individuals who would regularly travel on Global Airways flights, assessing the consistency of service across different demographics. Unlike traditional mystery shoppers who focus on service efficiency, Daniel noted, our mystery passengers will be specifically evaluating equity of treatment. As the presentation concluded, Sophia opened the floor for questions and feedback. A senior flight attendant raised her hand. This all sounds admirable, but in the real world of tight turnarounds and full flights, how practical is it to implement these additional steps? Daniel nodded, acknowledging the concern. That's exactly why we're starting with this pilot group. We need to ensure the protocol enhances rather than hinders operational efficiency. Over the next 3 days, we'll work through specific scenarios to refine the approach. Another hand went up, a gate agent with 20 years of experience. Will this mean we can't use our judgment anymore? Sometimes we do need to ask questions. Absolutely, Sophia replied. The Phoenix Protocol doesn't eliminate judgment. It improves it by removing unconscious bias from the equation. You'll still ask questions, but the protocol provides a framework for ensuring those questions are based on objective concerns, not subjective assumptions. To illustrate, she clicked to a new slide showing a real-world scenario. Let's consider this situation. A teenage passenger in casual clothing presents for boarding in first class. The old approach might be to question whether they're in the right line based on appearance. The Phoenix approach is to verify their boarding pass just as you would for any passenger, and if it shows first class, welcome them aboard. Simple, consistent, and respectful. As the training session progressed into small group discussions and practical exercises, Nathan Reynolds observed quietly from the back of the room. He hadn't announced his presence, preferring to let Sophia and Daniel lead without the pressure of the CEO watching over their shoulders. What he saw encouraged him. Frank discussions, thoughtful questions, and a genuine engagement with the material that suggested most employees recognized the importance of the changes being introduced. Later that evening, as he reviewed the day's progress with Sophia in his office, Nathan expressed cautious optimism. "It's a good start," he said. "But the real test will come when this rolls out company-wide. There will be resistance." Sophia nodded. "We're already hearing rumblings from some of the longtime staff who see this as an overreaction or as a criticism of their current approach." "That's to be expected," Nathan replied. "Change is uncomfortable, especially when it challenges long-held assumptions. The key will be demonstrating that this isn't just good ethics, it's good business." He glanced at a report on his desk, preliminary numbers on the cost of implementing the Phoenix Protocol across the entire airline. The figure was substantial, running into the millions when accounting for training time, new monitoring systems, and administrative overhead. "The board will question this expenditure," he acknowledged. Sophia left. Nathan turned to the window, looking out at the aircraft illuminated on the tarmac below, each bearing the Global Airways logo. A logo that he was determined would come to represent not just safety and service, but genuine equality of respect for every person who boarded their planes. Barbara Thompson had been flying with Global Airways and its predecessor airlines for 30 years. She had weathered mergers, bankruptcies, uniform changes, and countless revisions to service protocols. She prided herself on her adaptability and professionalism, but the Phoenix Protocol had pushed her to her breaking point. "This is nothing but excessive political correctness masquerading as customer service," she declared to a group of fellow senior flight attendants gathered in the crew lounge at Chicago O'Hare. "They're basically telling us we can't trust our own judgment anymore." Several heads nodded in agreement. The crew lounge had become an unofficial headquarters for resistance to the new protocol, particularly among veteran staff who felt their experience and discretion were being questioned. "You know what this is really about, don't you?" Barbara continued, her voice dripping with disdain as she lowered it slightly. "Reynolds' kid got her feelings hurt, and now we all have to walk on eggshells with every passenger." Mark Jensen, a 25-year veteran, sighed heavily. "The training was ridiculous. 3 hours on unconscious bias, as if we're all secret racists who need to be re-educated." "Exactly," Barbara exclaimed, slapping the table for emphasis. "I've flown with passengers from every background imaginable. I treat everyone the same. I don't need some corporate initiative to tell me how to do my job with respect." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. "And let me tell you what's going to happen. We'll have people claiming seats they didn't pay for kids running wild in first class, and when we try to maintain standards, we'll be called racist." What Barbara and her colleagues didn't realize was that their conversation was being overheard by Maria Rodriguez, one of the training specialists who had helped develop the Phoenix Protocol. She had come to Chicago specifically to gather feedback on the initial implementation. Rather than interrupting, Maria quietly observed, making mental notes about the nature of the resistance she was witnessing. It wasn't necessarily malicious. These were experienced professionals who felt their expertise was being devalued. That insight would be valuable for refining the approach. Meanwhile, in the corporate headquarters, Sophia was dealing with a more formal challenge to the protocol. A letter had been circulating among management questioning both the necessity and the approach of the Phoenix Protocol. Though anonymous, the writing style and specific references suggested it came from someone in the senior leadership team. "The company is overreacting to a single incident involving the CEO's daughter," the letter stated. "While the treatment Ms. Reynolds received was unfortunate, implementing a company-wide initiative at considerable expense seems disproportionate and potentially damaging to morale." Sophia brought the letter directly to Nathan, who read it with a thoughtful expression rather than the anger she had half expected. "Interesting," he said when he finished. "They're missing the point entirely, but their concerns about morale aren't invalid." How do you want to address this? Sophia asked. Nathan considered for a moment. Let's call an all-hands meeting, not just leadership but representatives from every department and employee group. It's time to address these concerns directly. 3 days later, the company's largest conference facility was filled to capacity. Employees from flight crews to maintenance, from reservations to corporate offices, gathered to hear directly from their CEO. The tension in the room was palpable, with clear divisions between those embracing the Phoenix Protocol and those resisting it. Nathan took the stage without fanfare, dressed in a simple suit rather than the more formal attire he typically wore for investor presentations. His approach was deliberate. This wasn't about corporate hierarchy. It was about honest communication. I've heard your concerns. He began, his voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the room. I've read the anonymous letter questioning the Phoenix Protocol. I've heard about the conversations in crew lounges and break rooms, and I want to address them directly. He paused, scanning the audience. Some of you believe this initiative exists because my daughter had a negative experience, that it's a personal crusade rather than a necessary business decision. Let me be clear. What happened to Jasmine was the catalyst, not the cause. Nathan stepped away from the podium, moving to the front of the stage to speak more directly to the assembled employees. The cause is the pattern of similar experiences that our data reveals has been happening to passengers across our network. The cause is the statistically significant disparity in how different passengers are treated based on factors that have nothing to do with their tickets or their behavior. The cause is that we have fallen short of our own standards. Barbara Thompson, seated in the third row, shifted uncomfortably but maintained her skeptical expression. Others have expressed concern that the protocol restricts your professional judgment or assumes the worst about your intentions. Nathan continued. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Phoenix Protocol isn't about restricting judgment. It's about enhancing it by ensuring decisions are based on verifiable facts rather than unconscious assumptions. He moved back to the podium to reference some notes. I've been told that some of you see this as political correctness. Let me address that directly. There is nothing political about treating every passenger with the same level of respect. There is nothing controversial about verifying facts before making assumptions. These aren't political values, they're human values, and they're Global Airways values. The room had grown quieter, the initial tension giving way to thoughtful attention. I understand change is difficult, Nathan acknowledged, especially when it asks us to examine assumptions we might not even realize we hold. But that discomfort is temporary. What's permanent is the kind of company we're building together. One where every passenger can expect the same excellent service regardless of who they are or how they look. He paused, making eye contact with several resistant employees, including Barbara. Let me share something personal, he said, his tone shifting slightly. When I was 25, just starting to build my first successful company, I walked into a luxury watch store to buy myself a reward. The salesperson took one look at me, young black, dressed casually, and immediately suggested I'd be more comfortable shopping elsewhere. A hush fell over the room as employees absorbed this personal glimpse into their normally private CEO's experience. That day, I promised myself that if I ever built a company of my own, no one would ever be judged by their appearance rather than their merit. His gaze swept across the audience. That's the company I'm building with you. Not because it's trendy or politically correct, but because it's right. And because it's good business. He concluded with a challenge. If you fundamentally disagree with these principles, Global Airways may no longer be the right place for you. But if you're willing to embrace this evolution of our culture, I promise you'll be part of building something remarkable. An airline that leads our industry not just in operational excellence, but in human excellence. The silence that followed was broken by a single person beginning to applaud, then another, until most of the room had joined in. Not the thunderous ovation of blind agreement, but the measured applause of respect and consideration. As employees filed out after the meeting, Barbara Thompson found herself walking beside Maria Rodriguez, whom she recognized from the training department. "He's a good speaker," Barbara admitted reluctantly. "But I still have concerns about how all this works in practice." Maria nodded. "Those concerns are valuable, Barbara. Your experience matters. What if you helped us refine the implementation? We need veteran perspective to make this work." Barbara looked surprised at the invitation. "You want input from the skeptics?" "Especially from the skeptics," Maria confirmed. "This isn't about imposing change from above. It's about building something together that works for everyone. Most importantly, our passengers." It wasn't immediate conversion, but it was the beginning of a dialogue. And as the Phoenix Protocol moved from concept to reality across Global Airways, such dialogues would prove essential to its evolution and ultimately its success. The implementation of the Phoenix Protocol across Global Airways' global operation was neither simple nor swift. It unfolded in carefully planned phases over 6 months, beginning with intensive training for management and trainers, then expanding to frontline staff across all departments. In a Chicago training center, flight attendants gathered for their first day of Phoenix Protocol certification. The room buzzed with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and cautious optimism. At the front, Maria Rodriguez welcomed the group, joined by an unexpected co-facilitator, Barbara Thompson. "Some of you might be surprised to see me here," Barbara acknowledged with a wry smile. 3 months ago, I was the protocol's biggest critic. Today, I'm helping implement it because I've seen how it enhances, rather than restricts, our ability to provide excellent service." The training began with a powerful exercise. Participants were asked to write down what first-class passenger meant to them. What image came to mind when they heard that phrase? The anonymous responses were collected and displayed on a screen. Business executive in a suit. Well-dressed older couple. Someone with expensive luggage. Confident, well-traveled person. Maria nodded, letting the descriptions sink in. Notice what's missing from most of these descriptions. Age diversity, racial diversity, casual clothing. Now let's look at the actual demographics of our first-class cabins based on our passenger data. The next slide revealed a much more diverse reality. Business travelers, yes, but also families using miles to upgrade, young entrepreneurs in casual attire, retired couples, and passengers of various ethnicities and backgrounds. "The gap between our mental image and reality," Barbara explained, "is where the risk lies. Not because we intend to treat people differently, but because unconscious expectations can influence our reactions." From there, the training moved into practical scenarios, many drawn from real incidents that had occurred on Global Airways flights. Each scenario challenged participants to apply the Phoenix Protocol principles in realistic situations. A young passenger assigned to first class, whose ticket is questioned, an older traveler struggling with the overhead bin who is ignored, while younger passengers receive immediate assistance. A non-English speaker who receives cursory service compared to other passengers. "The protocol isn't about following a rigid script," Maria emphasized. "It's about developing new habits of thought and action that ensure every passenger receives the same high level of service." One particularly powerful training module was built around security footage from Jasmine's incident with Victoria Hayes. With faces blurred for privacy, the silent black and white video showed the stark contrast between Hayes' dismissive treatment of Jasmine and her deferential approach to other passengers. "This happened on our airline," Barbara said solemnly after the video played. "Look at the body language, the physical positioning. Notice how the flight attendant places herself between the young passenger and the boarding door, how she physically directs her away from the line. These aren't conscious decisions. They're automatic responses based on unconscious assumptions." The room fell silent as the participants absorbed the reality of what they had just witnessed. For many, it was the first time they had seen such a clear example of differential treatment based solely on appearance. Now, Maria continued, let's workshop how this situation could have been handled appropriately under the Phoenix Protocol, and similar scenes played out in training centers across the Global Airways network, in New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, and beyond. The company had committed substantial resources to ensuring that every customer-facing employee received not just initial training, but ongoing support and refreshers. Meanwhile, the operational aspects of the protocol were being integrated into the airline's systems. The IT department developed a new module for the customer service platform that allowed staff to flag potential equity concerns, which would then be reviewed by a dedicated team. The Mystery Passenger Program launched with 30 diverse participants flying regular routes and providing detailed feedback on their experiences. At headquarters, Nathan Reynolds received weekly progress reports tracking implementation metrics, employee feedback, and initial impact data. 6 weeks into the rollout, the numbers were promising. Complaints related to discriminatory treatment had decreased by 22%, while positive feedback about inclusive service had increased by 17%. But numbers told only part of the story. The real impact could be seen in the changing culture across the airline's operations. In the first-class lounge at JFK, a customer service agent was observed spending extra time helping an elderly woman of color who was confused about her connecting flight, the same level of attention previously reserved primarily for the lounge's most obviously affluent patrons. On a flight from San Francisco to Dallas, a flight attendant who noticed a teenager being seated in first class simply welcomed him warmly. No questions, no surprised looks, just the same professional courtesy extended to every other passenger. At the gate for a delayed flight from Miami, agents made announcements in both English and Spanish without being asked, ensuring all passengers had equal access to important information. Small changes, perhaps, but collectively they represented a significant shift in how passengers experienced Global Airways. The Phoenix Protocol wasn't without its challenges. Some employees struggled to adapt, viewing the changes as excessive or unnecessary. A small number chose to leave the company rather than embrace the new approach, but they were the exception rather than the rule. 3 months into implementation, Barbara Thompson found herself on a Chicago to Tokyo flight serving in first class. A young Asian girl, perhaps 15, was seated alone in 3A, dressed in jeans and a university sweatshirt. Pre-protocol. Barbara might have wondered about her presence in first class, might even have checked her boarding pass with extra scrutiny. Instead, she simply smiled and asked, "What would you like to drink before takeoff?" The girl looked momentarily surprised, perhaps accustomed to being questioned, before smiling back. "Sparkling water, please." As Barbara served the drink, she noticed the book the girl was reading, a complex text on astrophysics. Their brief conversation revealed she was a prodigy heading to a special science program in Japan. Later in the galley, Barbara reflected on how easily she might have missed making this connection if she had been focused on questioning whether the girl belonged in first class rather than simply providing excellent service. It was a small moment, but it represented the essence of what the Phoenix Protocol sought to achieve. A culture where every passenger was seen as an individual deserving of respect rather than being judged against unconscious expectations of who belonged where. As Barbara later told Maria during a feedback session, "I've always prided myself on providing good service. What I'm realizing is that I wasn't always providing it equally, and that's the difference the protocol is making, not just for our passengers, but for us." 6 months after Victoria Hayes questioned Jasmine Reynolds' right to sit in first-class Global Airways held its quarterly leadership meeting. The agenda included the first comprehensive assessment of the Phoenix Protocol's impact. The executive boardroom looked much as it had on that pivotal day when Nathan had first announced the initiative, but the atmosphere was markedly different. Gone was the skepticism that had greeted the original proposal. In its place was a cautious optimism fueled by increasingly positive data. Sophia Alvarez, now officially the Chief Equity Officer, in addition to her role as Nathan's executive assistant, presented the findings. The numbers tell a compelling story. She began gesturing to the screens displaying meticulously compiled statistics. Customer satisfaction scores have increased across all passenger demographics, with the most significant gains among passengers of color, older travelers, and families with children. The charts showed a clear upward trend, particularly in categories related to feeling welcomed and consistency of service. Equally important, Sophia continued, is what we're seeing in employee metrics. After an initial dip in satisfaction during the transition period, we're now recording the highest employee engagement scores in 5 years. Daniel Williams, VP of Customer Experience, leaned forward. What's driving that? I would have expected more resistance to persist. Sophia nodded to Barbara Thompson, who had been invited to provide a frontline perspective. Barbara had emerged as an unexpected champion of the protocol, her initial skepticism giving way to genuine advocacy after seeing its effects in practice. It's simpler than you might think, Barbara explained. People go into service industries because they want to provide good service. The protocol gives us tools to do that more effectively and consistently. When we see the positive responses from passengers, it's professionally satisfying. Thomas Collins, the COO who had initially questioned the need for a company-wide initiative, nodded thoughtfully. The operational impact has been noteworthy as well. We've seen a 15% reduction in boarding delays related to seating disputes. And from a legal perspective, added Kevin Blackwell, the reduction in discrimination-related complaints significantly decreases our liability exposure. Several potential cases have been resolved at the customer service level that previously might have escalated to litigation. Nathan listened to the reports with satisfaction, though he was careful not to let the early success create complacency. These are encouraging signs, he acknowledged when the presentations concluded. But sustaining this transformation will require ongoing commitment and vigilance. He turned to James Peterson, who had been one of the most vocal skeptics initially. James, your thoughts. You've been relatively quiet during this review. Peterson straightened in his chair. I'll admit I had serious doubts about both the necessity and the approach of the protocol. I saw it as an emotional response to a personal incident rather than a business decision. He paused, glancing at the data displayed on the screens. The results have challenged my perspective. This wasn't just the right thing to do ethically. It appears to be the right thing to do commercially as well. Nathan nodded, appreciating the candid assessment. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Treating people with consistent dignity and respect isn't just the right thing to do ethically, it's good business. The meeting continued with discussions of refinements and next steps, including the expansion of the Mystery Passenger Program and the development of advanced training modules for new hires. Beyond the boardroom, the transformation was visible throughout Global Airways operations. In crew lounges, the conversations had shifted. Rather than complaining about the protocol's requirements, staff now shared success stories and strategies for implementation. The initial resistance had largely given way to professional pride in being part of an industry-leading initiative. At check-in counters, gate areas, and onboard aircraft, the changes were subtle but significant. Staff interacted with passengers more consistently. Verification procedures were applied uniformly, and the overall atmosphere was one of inclusive professionalism. Despite the overall success, Nathan knew the transformation remained fragile. Just last month, an audit had revealed subtle service disparities reappearing on certain international routes, requiring immediate attention and retraining. The protocol required constant vigilance and reinforcement to prevent old habits from resurfacing. Jasmine, now 13, noticed the difference during her spring break trip to visit her father. Flying unaccompanied from Boston to New York, she observed how the flight attendant greeted every first-class passenger with the same warm welcome. No raised eyebrows, no extra scrutiny for those who didn't fit the traditional first-class passenger stereotype. When she shared this observation with her father over dinner at his Manhattan apartment, Nathan smiled. That's exactly how it should be. Not special treatment for anyone, equal excellent treatment for everyone. Jasmine considered this. "The flight attendant didn't know who I was," she noted. "She just treated me like any other passenger." "That's the true measure of success," Nathan replied. "Not how people behave when they know they're being watched, but how they act when they think no one is looking." The Phoenix Protocol was transforming Global Airways from the inside out, creating a culture where dignity and respect were not aspirational values mentioned in corporate materials, but lived realities experienced by every passenger who boarded their aircraft. And it had all begun with one flight attendant questioning one young girl's right to sit in first class, a moment of discrimination that had catalyzed a movement toward genuine equality. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City glittered with the aviation industry's elite. The annual Global Aviation Excellence Awards, the most prestigious recognition in the industry, was in full swing. CEOs, government officials, and industry leaders mingled over champagne and gourmet hors d'oeuvres, celebrating innovation and achievement across the sector. Nathan Reynolds moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging greetings with competitors and colleagues alike. Though he had attended this event for years, tonight felt different. Global Airways was nominated for the Customer Experience Excellence Award, a recognition of the transformative impact of the Phoenix Protocol over the past 2 years. "Nathan," a voice called from nearby. Martin Cooper, CEO of Pacific Air, approached with a warm smile. "Congratulations on the nomination. The Phoenix Protocol has certainly made waves." Nathan shook his hand. "Thank you, Martin. Though I think made waves might be an understatement." Cooper laughed. "Fair point. Industry revolution might be more accurate. We're implementing our own version next quarter." "Had to really. Your customer satisfaction metrics have made the rest of us look bad." Before Nathan could respond, the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the awards ceremony. As he made his way to the Global Airways table where Sophia Barbara Michael and other key team members were already seated, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years ago, the Phoenix Protocol had been a direct response to his daughter's humiliation. Now it was being recognized as a pioneering approach to equitable customer service with tangible business benefits that had silenced even the most skeptical analysts. After several industry awards were presented, the MC announced the Customer Experience Excellence category. A video montage showcased the 3 finalists with Global Airways featured prominently. The clip included interviews with diverse passengers describing their experiences, interspersed with scenes of staff implementing the protocol's principles across various touchpoints. "The results speak for themselves," the narrator concluded. "A 47% reduction in discrimination-related complaints, a 28% increase in customer loyalty among previously underserved demographics, and the highest employee satisfaction scores in the company's history." When Global Airways was announced as the winner, the applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Nathan approached the podium, accepting the crystal trophy with a gracious nod. "This recognition belongs not to me, but to every Global Airways employee who embraced the challenge of change," he began. 2 years ago, we asked our people to examine long-held assumptions, to question traditional approaches, and to commit to a higher standard of equity and service." He paused, scanning the audience. The Phoenix Protocol wasn't born from a focus group or a consultant's recommendation. It was catalyzed by a real incident, one that revealed a gap between our aspiration to treat all passengers with equal respect and the reality some passengers experienced. Without mentioning Jasmine by name or the specific details of the incident, Nathan acknowledged the personal connection that had sparked the initiative. Sometimes it takes a personal experience to reveal a structural problem. What matters is how we respond to that revelation, whether we dismiss it as an isolated incident or recognize it as an opportunity for meaningful change. He concluded by addressing the industry leaders present. "The award we're receiving tonight recognizes what we've accomplished at Global Airways. But the true measure of our impact will be how many other airlines and service industries follow suit, not because they're competing with us, but because treating every customer with equal dignity and respect is simply the right thing to do, not because it's mandated by regulations, but because it reflects who we are as an industry. The audience rose in a standing ovation, not the perfunctory applause of obligation, but the genuine recognition of a standard that had elevated the entire industry. Later that evening, at a small celebratory gathering in Global Airways' corporate suite, Nathan shared the award with his team. As champagne flowed and conversations hummed around him, Michael Ramirez approached with a reflective smile. "From crisis to industry gold standard in 2 years," Michael mused. "Not bad for something that started with a flight attendant questioning a child's ticket." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The incident with Jasmine was the catalyst, but the real transformation has been driven by people like Barbara, who initially resisted but ultimately became our strongest advocates." Across the room, Barbara Thompson was deep in conversation with airline executives from Europe and Asia, explaining nuances of the Phoenix Protocol with the passion of a true convert. Her journey from skeptic to champion exemplified the cultural shift that had occurred throughout Global Airways. "The award is nice," Nathan admitted, "but the real victory is in the day-to-day experience of our passengers, especially those who previously might have felt unwelcome or out of place." Michael raised his glass. "To equal excellence for all." Nathan clinked his glass against Michael's. "To dignity as our foundation, not our aspiration." 14-year-old Jasmine Reynolds sat in her grandmother's sunlit kitchen in Boston, textbooks spread across the table as she worked on her social studies project. Alexandra moved around the kitchen preparing lunch, occasionally glancing at her granddaughter with quiet pride. "Grandma," Jasmine asked, looking up from her notes, "do you think Dad's airline would be a good case study for my corporate responsibility project?" Alexandra paused, considering the question. "It certainly demonstrates how business decisions can address social issues. Why are you thinking about using it?" Jasmine twirled her pencil thoughtfully. "We're supposed to analyze a company that's made changes to become more socially responsible and show the business impact of those changes. The Phoenix Protocol seems perfect." "It does," Alexandra agreed, setting a sandwich in front of Jasmine. "Have you talked to your father about it?" "Not yet. I wanted to organize my thoughts first." Jasmine took a bite of her sandwich. "The thing is, I'd have to talk about what happened to me, about how Victoria Hayes treated me." Alexandra sat across from her granddaughter, her expression gentle. "And how do you feel about that?" "I'm not embarrassed about it anymore," Jasmine said after a moment. "At first I felt like I had done something wrong even though I knew I hadn't, but now I understand it wasn't about me at all. It was about assumptions people make without even realizing it." Alexandra nodded, impressed by her granddaughter's maturity. "That's a very insightful way to look at it." That weekend, when Nathan flew to Boston for his monthly visit, Jasmine presented her project outline. They sat in Alexandra's cozy living room, Nathan reviewing the carefully organized notes with growing appreciation for his daughter's analytical mind. "This is thoughtful work, Jasmine," he said. "You've identified the key elements of the protocol and its business impacts very clearly." Jasmine smiled at the praise. "I've been following the news about Global Airways. The award last month was a big deal." "It was," Nathan agreed. "But what matters more is the change in day-to-day experiences for our passengers and employees." Jasmine hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Dad, do you ever think about Victoria Hayes, about what happened to her after you fired her?" Nathan set down the notes, giving his daughter his full attention. "I do occasionally. She found work with a regional airline eventually, though not in a customer-facing role. The last I heard, she was in scheduling." "Do you regret firing her?" Jasmine asked, watching her father's face carefully. Nathan considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I regret that it was necessary, but no, I don't regret the decision itself. Actions have consequences, especially when they affect others negatively." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. What happened that day revealed a pattern, not an isolated mistake. The termination wasn't just about punishing one person. It was about establishing that certain behaviors are incompatible with our company values. Jasmine nodded, absorbing her father's perspective. In my research, I found something interesting. Companies that take strong ethical stands often face short-term costs, but gain long-term benefits in reputation and customer loyalty. That's been our experience, Nathan confirmed. The Phoenix Protocol required significant investment, but the returns, both financial and cultural, have far exceeded those costs. Their conversation continued into the evening, evolving from an academic discussion about corporate responsibility to more personal reflections on the incident that had sparked such significant change. You know, Jasmine said as they were finishing dinner, I'd like to see how the airline works from the inside. Not just as your daughter flying first class, but really understanding the operations. Nathan looked surprised but intrigued. What did you have in mind? Could I do some kind of internship during summer break? Something where I could see different departments and understand how everything fits together. Alexandra, who had been quietly listening, smiled at her granddaughter's initiative. That's a wonderful idea. Nathan considered the request. We could arrange something, he agreed. But not as Jasmine Reynolds, CEO's daughter. You'd need to experience it as any other intern would. Jasmine's eyes lit up. That's exactly what I want. No special treatment. 3 months later, as summer vacation began, Jasmine Carter, using her mother's maiden name, reported for her first day as a summer intern in Global Airways Customer Service Department at JFK International Airport. Only Sofia Alvarez and the HR director knew her true identity. Dressed in the company's standard intern uniform, navy slacks and a light blue button-down shirt, Jasmine joined 5 other high school students in the orientation program. For the next 8 weeks, she would rotate through check-in gate operations and the customer service desk, gaining first-hand experience of the airline's frontline operations. The experience proved transformative. Jasmine witnessed the Phoenix Protocol in action from the service provider's perspective, understanding both its challenges and its impact. She saw passengers from all backgrounds being treated with consistent respect and occasionally caught glimpses of the additional effort required to overcome unconscious assumptions. Most importantly, she developed a deeper appreciation for the complexity of running an airline and the countless human interactions that shaped passengers' experiences. By summer's end, Jasmine Carter had earned a reputation as a diligent, insightful intern with a particular talent for diffusing tense situations with calm empathy. Her supervisor's evaluation noted that she demonstrates an unusual degree of emotional intelligence and perspective-taking for someone her age. What no one realized was how much of that ability had been shaped by her experience 2 years earlier, and by watching her father transform a painful incident into positive, lasting change. The Monday morning rush at JFK's Terminal 4 was in full swing. Check-in counters were crowded with travelers, conveyor belts laden with luggage, and the air filled with the controlled chaos typical of one of the world's busiest international terminals. At position 14, Jasmine Reynolds, still known to her colleagues as Jasmine Carter, was in the final week of her summer internship working alongside Melissa Parker, a veteran customer service agent. Together, they processed a steady stream of passengers bound for London on Global Airways' morning flight. Next, please, Jasmine called, smiling as an elderly South Asian couple approached the counter. She processed their check-in efficiently, tagging their bags and explaining the security procedure with patient clarity despite the language barrier. Nice job, Melissa commented as the couple moved toward security. You've really got a knack for this. Jasmine smiled, appreciating the genuine compliment. Over the past weeks, she had grown confident in her role, mastering the computer system and developing the interpersonal skills essential for customer service. Next, please. A harried-looking businessman rushed to the counter, tossing his passport and printed itinerary toward Jasmine. I need to be upgraded to first class, he demanded without preamble. I can't possibly sit in economy for 7 hours. Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor. "Good morning, sir. I'd be happy to check available upgrades for you. May I see your boarding pass, please?" The man sighed impatiently. "I just gave you my information. Just put me in first class." "I need your reservation details first, sir. Then we'll talk upgrades." Jasmine replied firmly but politely, refusing to be intimidated by his attitude. As she entered his details, Melissa leaned over. "First class is fully booked," she whispered. "Only premium economy upgrades available." Jasmine nodded her understanding, then addressed the passenger. "Sir, I can offer you an upgrade to premium economy for $350, but unfortunately, first class is fully booked for this flight." The man's expression darkened. "That's not acceptable. Look, I'm a Gold Elite member. Surely you can find a way to make this happen." Jasmine checked his account, confirming his status. "I appreciate your loyalty, sir, and I'd certainly help if I could, but the first-class cabin is truly at capacity. Premium economy would give you additional legroom and enhanced service." "I want to speak to your supervisor," he interrupted, voice rising. "Someone who actually has authority to solve problems." Jasmine glanced at Melissa, who gave a subtle nod indicating she should continue handling the situation. "Sir," Jasmine said calmly, "I understand your frustration. While I can't create a seat in first class where none exists, I am authorized to offer you priority boarding and a complimentary dining voucher for the airport restaurant while you wait in addition to the premium economy option." The man stared at her for a moment, seemingly taken aback by her composure. "Fine," he finally relented. "Premium economy. But I expect better service on board to make up for this inconvenience." As Jasmine completed the upgrade and printed his new boarding pass, Melissa gave her an approving nod. "Perfect application of Phoenix Protocol de-escalation techniques," she murmured. "You didn't take his attitude personally, maintained respect throughout, and found a solution within available parameters." After the man left, their supervisor, David Torres, who had been observing from nearby, approached. "Well handled, Jasmine. That could have escalated quickly." "Thanks," Jasmine replied, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. "The protocol training really helps in those situations." The morning continued at a steady pace until a disruption several positions down caught their attention. A young black teenager, perhaps 16 or 17, was engaged in what appeared to be a tense interaction with another agent. "But I have a first-class ticket," the girl was saying, her voice rising with frustration. "Why do I need additional verification?" The agent, an older woman named Helen, who had been with the airline since before the Reynolds acquisition, was shaking her head. "It's just protocol, miss. Unaccompanied minors in premium cabins require additional verification." Jasmine tensed immediately, recognizing what was happening. The Phoenix Protocol explicitly stated that verification procedures must be applied consistently based on objective criteria, not subjective assessments. She had seen other unaccompanied minors checked in for first class that very morning without additional verification. Before she could intervene, David Torres was already moving toward the situation tablet in hand. Jasmine watched as he smoothly joined the interaction. "Good morning," he said warmly to the young passenger. "I see you're traveling in first class today. Wonderful, Helen, I can handle this check-in while you assist the next passenger." Helen looked briefly confused but stepped aside. David quickly processed the girl's check-in, apologized for the delay, and directed her to the first-class lounge. When the rush subsided, David gathered the team for a brief huddle. Without singling out Helen, he refreshed everyone on the verification protocols. "Remember, our procedures are based on clear objective criteria," he emphasized. "Age verification for alcohol service passport checks for international flights. These apply to everyone. But we don't have different standards for who looks like they belong in certain cabins. That's a core Phoenix Protocol principle." Helen looked uncomfortable but nodded along with the others. Jasmine noticed David make a note on his tablet, likely documenting the incident for follow-up training rather than punitive action. Later, as Jasmine and Melissa took their lunch break in the staff cafeteria, Melissa commented on the morning's events. You know, before the protocol, that scene with the young passenger would have played out very differently, she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. It would have been seen as normal, even appropriate, to question a teenager traveling first class alone, especially a black teenager, Jasmine added quietly. Melissa nodded. Exactly. The change hasn't been perfect, as you saw with Helen today. But it's significant. 2 years ago, that girl might have faced the same treatment in every interaction throughout her journey. Today it was caught and corrected immediately. Jasmine considered this. Do you think Helen meant to discriminate? Probably not consciously, Melissa replied. That's what makes these situations complicated. Helen likely believes she treats everyone equally, but her gut feelings about who belongs where are shaped by decades of cultural messaging. This insight struck Jasmine deeply. Victoria Hayes probably hadn't considered herself prejudiced either, yet her actions had clearly been shaped by similar unconscious assumptions. In the final days of her internship, Jasmine found herself handling increasingly complex situations, her supervisors recognizing her unusual poise and judgment. On her last day, she was assigned to the customer service desk handling disruptions, a position normally reserved for experienced staff. A weather system had forced the cancellation of several flights, creating a stressful environment as agents worked to rebook affected passengers. Jasmine was assisting a Spanish-speaking family who were struggling to understand their options when a commotion erupted nearby. "This is unacceptable," a middle-aged man was shouting at another agent. "You're rebooking everyone else but telling me I have to wait until tomorrow. This is discrimination, plain and simple." The agent, clearly flustered, was trying to explain that earlier flights were full when Jasmine, having finished with the family, approached. "Excuse me," she said politely. "Perhaps I can help." The man turned to her, frustration evident on his face. "They've canceled my flight to Chicago and everyone's getting rebooked except me." "It's because I'm not a frequent flyer, isn't it?" Jasmine maintained her calm demeanor. "Sir, I understand your frustration. May I see your boarding pass so I can look into this for you?" After examining his information, Jasmine quickly identified the issue. "Sir, the reason you haven't been automatically rebooked is that you have a special meal request. The system is looking for flights that can accommodate your kosher meal preference, which adds a parameter to the rebooking process." The man's anger deflated somewhat. "Oh, I didn't realize. Let me see what I can do." Jasmine continued typing rapidly. "There's a flight departing in 3 hours that has kosher meals available. I can confirm you on that one in your original class of service if that works for you." The transformation in the passenger's demeanor was immediate. "Yes, that would be perfect. Thank you for explaining the situation." As the man walked away with his new boarding pass, David Torres, who had been observing the interaction, approached Jasmine. "That," he said quietly, "was the Phoenix Protocol in action. You identified the actual issue rather than responding defensively to the accusation. You maintained respect even when faced with anger, and you found a solution that addressed his specific needs." He handed her an envelope, her final evaluation. "This is normally a formality, but in your case I've added a personal note recommending you for our college internship program, should you be interested in the future." Jasmine accepted the envelope with genuine gratitude, knowing that the recommendation had been earned through her work, not her name. That evening, as she changed out of her uniform for the last time, Jasmine reflected on the summer's experiences. She had entered the internship wanting to understand the airline's operations. She was leaving with something far more valuable, a first-hand understanding of how organizational values translated into daily actions, and how those actions shaped the experiences of thousands of passengers. She had seen the Phoenix Protocol tested in real-world conditions, and witnessed both its successes and ongoing challenges. Most importantly, she had experienced the quiet dignity of work done well and fairly, a lesson that would shape her approach to responsibilities far beyond this summer internship. By the 3rd anniversary of the Phoenix Protocol's implementation, what had once been revolutionary had become routine across Global Airways. New hires were onboarded directly into the protocol's approach, with many unaware that the airline had ever operated differently. In the executive offices at headquarters, Nathan Reynolds reviewed the quarterly performance reports with satisfaction. Customer satisfaction metrics remained at historic highs, with the gap between demographic groups narrowed to statistical insignificance, a key indicator that service quality had genuinely equalized across passenger populations. Employee engagement scores told a similar story. After the initial resistance and adjustment period, Global Airways was now recording the lowest turnover rates in the industry. The airline had become an employer of choice, with experienced staff from competitors seeking to join an organization known for its positive culture and clear values. "These numbers validate everything we've built," Nathan commented to Sophia during their weekly briefing. "But the anecdotal feedback might be even more telling." Sophia nodded, pulling up a collection of customer testimonials on her tablet. "We've been gathering these systematically. They paint a compelling picture." The testimonials came from passengers across demographics, routes, and service classes, from a 72-year-old Asian woman. "For the first time in my 50 years of flying, I wasn't automatically directed to economy or asked if I needed help understanding my first-class benefits. I was simply welcomed and respected." From a Latino family traveling with young children. "We've always felt subtly unwelcome in premium cabins on other airlines, like we were being silently questioned. On Global Airways, we were treated like any other passengers, which is exactly as it should be." From a young Black executive, the consistency of service is remarkable. From check-in to landing, every interaction carried the same level of respect and attention. That shouldn't be revolutionary, but unfortunately it still is. Perhaps most significant were the comments from passengers who had no idea they were experiencing something unique. They simply noted the excellent service without realizing it represented a deliberate cultural transformation. "That's when you know you've truly succeeded," Nathan observed. "When treating everyone with equal respect becomes so normal that it's no longer remarkable." The business impact had been equally profound. Global Airways had increased its market share in key demographic segments previously underserved by the industry. Customer loyalty metrics showed stronger retention across all passenger groups, with a particularly notable increase among minorities and younger travelers. Despite the evident success, Nathan remained vigilant. Just last month, an audit had revealed subtle service disparities reappearing on certain international routes, requiring immediate attention and retraining. The protocol's success depended on constant reinforcement and vigilance against the gradual return of old habits. Wall Street had taken notice as well. Initially skeptical about the substantial investment in the protocol, analysts had changed their tune as the financial benefits became evident. Global Airways stock had outperformed the airline index by 22% since the protocol's implementation, with analysts specifically citing improved customer retention and employee engagement as key drivers. Barbara Thompson, now the Director of Service Excellence, had become a frequent speaker at industry conferences, sharing the journey from skeptic to advocate. Her perspective as someone who had initially resisted the changes lent credibility to her presentations about the protocol's impact. "The beauty of the Phoenix Protocol," she often explained, "is that it doesn't lower standards for anyone. It raises them for everyone by eliminating the unconscious biases that previously influenced service delivery." Beyond Global Airways, the impact of the protocol had rippled throughout the industry. Competing airlines had implemented their own versions, sometimes under different names, but always incorporating the core principles of verification before assumption and consistent excellence, regardless of passenger characteristics. The transformation extended beyond commercial benefits. Global Airways had become a case study in business schools, with professors using the Phoenix Protocol as an example of how ethical leadership could align moral imperatives with business success. Nathan had received numerous awards and recognitions, though he consistently redirected credit to the frontline staff who had embraced and implemented the changes in their daily work. When pressed about his personal motivation, He acknowledged the incident with Jasmine, only in broad terms, emphasizing that the protocol addressed a structural issue rather than a single event. In a rare interview with The Economist, Nathan articulated his philosophy. The measure of a company isn't how it treats its most privileged customers or most senior executives. It's how it treats every person who interacts with its brand. At Global Airways, we've made equal respect the foundation of our service culture, not an aspirational goal. These weren't just words. Mystery passenger audits consistently verified that service quality remained high across all passenger demographics, with discrepancies quickly identified and addressed through additional training rather than punitive measures. The protocol had evolved as well, incorporating feedback from employees and passengers to refine its approach. What had begun as a response to discrimination had developed into a comprehensive framework for excellence in human interaction, one that recognized and respected the dignity of every person in the Global Airways ecosystem, from passengers to employees at every level. On a crisp autumn morning, 18-year-old Jasmine Reynolds stood in her grandmother's Boston home suitcase packed for her first semester at Stanford University. The years since the incident with Victoria Hayes had transformed the quiet 12-year-old into a poised young woman with clear purpose and quiet confidence. Alexandra adjusted the collar of Jasmine's jacket, her eyes misty with pride. "Your father should be here any minute to drive you to the airport. I told him he didn't need to fly all the way to Boston just to take me to the airport," Jasmine said, smiling. "Some moments a father doesn't want to miss," Alexandra replied. "Your first flight to college is one of them." The doorbell rang, and moments later Nathan entered, embracing his daughter and mother warmly. "All ready for the big adventure?" he asked Jasmine. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in her voice. The drive to Logan International Airport was filled with comfortable conversation about Jasmine's plans for her first semester, her intended major in organizational psychology, and the campus activities she hoped to join. Neither father nor daughter explicitly referenced the events of 6 years earlier, yet both were acutely aware that this journey to the airport carried special significance. At the Global Airways first-class check-in counter, Nathan stepped back slightly, allowing Jasmine to handle the process independently. She was dressed casually in jeans, sneakers, and a Stanford sweatshirt, not unlike her attire on that pivotal day years ago. The agent, a young man who had joined the airline well after the Phoenix Protocol became standard practice, greeted her with genuine warmth. "Good morning, heading to San Francisco today?" "Yes," Jasmine confirmed, presenting her ID and confirmation number. The agent processed her check-in efficiently, offering relevant information about the flight and lounge access without a hint of surprise or skepticism about her presence in first class, despite her youth and casual attire. "Have a wonderful flight, Ms. Reynolds, and good luck with your first semester at Stanford." As they walked away from the counter, Nathan squeezed his daughter's shoulder gently. "Notice anything?" Jasmine nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "He didn't blink an eye at me flying first class in a sweatshirt. No double-checking, no surprised looks. Just efficient, friendly service." "That's the legacy," Nathan said simply. "Not special treatment for anyone. Equal excellent treatment for everyone." They continued to the security checkpoint where Nathan would say goodbye. Before Jasmine entered the line, her father took both her hands in his. "I'm so proud of the young woman you've become," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your intelligence, your compassion, your quiet strength. These are gifts you've always had. But watching you transform a painful experience into understanding and growth has been one of my greatest privileges as your father." Jasmine blinked back, tears squeezing her father's hands. "What you did matters, Dad. Not just for me, but for everyone who flies on Global Airways, especially those who might otherwise have been made to feel they don't belong." Nathan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he found his voice again, he said, "Remember what we talked about when you were 12? About how sometimes people's assumptions reflect their limitations, not your worth. I remember, Jasmine said. And I've learned something else, too. That one person with clarity and courage can change those assumptions not just for themselves, but for everyone who comes after them. They embraced one final time before Jasmine joined the security line, turning once to wave before disappearing into the terminal. Nathan watched until she was out of sight, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a father's protective response to his daughter's humiliation had evolved into a transformation that touched millions of lives in ways both subtle and profound. The true measure of the Phoenix Protocol's success wasn't in awards or profit margins, though those had certainly followed. It was in moments like this, when a young woman could move through the world with the quiet confidence that she belonged wherever her talents and efforts took her, without needing to justify her presence or overcome others' assumptions. As Nathan turned to leave the airport, his phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine already through security. "Flight on time. Boarding in 45 mins. Love you, Dad. Thank you for everything." The simple message carried layers of meaning that only the two of them fully understood. Gratitude not just for college tuition or first-class tickets, but for the lesson that dignity wasn't something to be granted by others, but a fundamental right, and that meaningful change required not just outrage, but sustained, principled action. That lesson, more than any material legacy, would shape Jasmine's future, and through her, the lives of countless others. It was a legacy of quiet strength, of transforming pain into progress, and of the profound impact one person could have when they refused to accept the world as it was, and instead worked to create the world as it should be. In that sense, the true legacy of that difficult day 6 years ago wasn't the Phoenix Protocol itself, but the ripples of change that continued to spread outward, touching lives in ways that neither father nor daughter could fully measure, but both deeply understood. This powerful true story shows how one moment of discrimination transformed not just an airline, but potentially an entire industry. It reminds us that real change happens not through grand gestures, but through consistent commitment to treating everyone with equal dignity and respect. If you were moved by Jasmine and Nathan's journey, please like this video and share it with others who might benefit from its message. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of everyday heroes making extraordinary changes in their communities and workplaces. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination that led to positive change? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Together we can create a world where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve.